Yeah, the Basque people have a fascinating history. Really interesting place. Let's see here. Okay, we're live, guys. No hiccups today. Jason, good job, man. We've had some hiccups of late, so uh, that's good. We're here with Jasun Horsley today. I'm going to go ahead and hit record and fire this up. Stoked to have you on today with us, my friend. Here we go. Do 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 do. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with my good friend and a doctor on the land there, Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme, up here on the gorgeous Smith River. It's been a little smoky over where you're at the last few days, huh, Bear?
Yes, it has been. A lot of fires in the next county over in Siskiyou and Bigfoot country there. So hopefully Squatch is okay. But yeah, big fires out there.
Yeah, it seems to
Fortunately,
be.
not here yet.
Tis the season. Seems like every year now, it's a continual threat, something that we have to deal with. But fortunately, no other biblical apocalypse like natural phenomenon here. It's just mainly fire that we have to worry about. And we've been put through the ringer in past, as a lot of our community knows. So, we have done shows on the past on fire, and it is a powerful elemental, something that we engage with, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that we're not going through that again this year. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and Jason, if you aren't aware, we live out in the wilderness. We're off grid, and we are coming, via satellite. And there's been a great effort to burn a lot of this part of the Pacific Northwest out to grab land like they're doing all over the states. But anyway, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. For those listening, I put quotation marks when I said natural. So, because I know this does go out as an audio podcast, Jason. But yeah, indeed not natural. And we've documented that plenty in previous streams. Happy to have Jason on today. We're going to have a great flowing chat. And thanks to everybody who's new to Alfa Vedic. You can find out more about us on our website at alfavedic.com. That's with an F, ALFAVEDIC.com. Today, Jasun Horsley is joining us. He was born into a family of the British elite. When he was a child, he was unaware that his paternal grandfather, Alec Horsley, Oxford, how do I say this word? Because there's got
Balliol.
Balliol. I just noticed it's got ball in it.
Oldest school at Oxford, I believe. Is that right, Jason?
I mean, I'm as clueless as you are, really, but yeah, apparently. It's not like my grandfather talked about this stuff, or I wasn't interested if he did, unfortunately.
Well, interesting enough, he was a founding member of the Campaign of Nuclear Disarmament. He was also a Fabian and helped found the Hull branch when he was sheriff of Hull. Jason's father also rubbed elbows with characters like Sir Richard Acland, Bertrand Russell, and the Paedophile Information Exchange, a British pro-paedophilia activist group. Jason was made aware that his family's circle of influence were mockingly called champagne socialists, and that the family business, Northern Foods, was in cahoots with other notable corporate giants while being a major player in world business. One thing was clear to Jason from an early age: he had no interest in joining the family business. At age 18, he inherited a small fortune from his father, which landed him in New York as an aspiring filmmaker. Upon his discovery of the teachings of Don Juan through the works of Carlos Castaneda, he decided that sorcery was a truer and more adventurous path. He later concluded that there was much congruity between the film industry and sorcery, which was later explored in his book, Seen and Not Seen: Confessions of a Movie Autist, that examines the military entertainment complex and how American movies have become weaponized. Jason's pursuits of sorcery knowledge led him to Oaxaca, Mexico, and then to New Mexico, where he made a misguided attempt to start an intentional community, after which, at age 24, he disinherited his fortune and disappeared to Morocco, with nothing but a poncho and meager belongings. Some 30 years since, Jason has continued his introspection into the ways in which popular culture, alternate or counterculture, politics, and pseudo-spirituality are all limbs of a covert, multi-generational social engineering octopus that includes occult societies, intelligence agencies, and organized crime networks, while spanning centuries along many disparate groups, ideologies, organizations, and agendas. Jason has determined the superculture to be largely consistent in its aims, principles, and methods. Today, we're going to have a free-flowing discussion with Jason as we welcome him to this community. That was a brief intro we pulled out of your Substack there, Jason, and we're just looking forward to hearing more from you. Take it away, my friend Bear.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really looking forward to this conversation. I know our whole audience is. And when I was putting together that little intro that Mike just read, I pulled it out from your website. So please correct anything if I misrepresented or put things out there wrong.
No, I was wondering where it came from because I recognized some of it, but I didn't recognize others. So I was just hoping that it wasn't AI, the hand of AI.
No, I like to write myself, and I refrain from AI. But I did do a lot of paraphrasing and just putting things together. So hopefully.
Yeah, no, it was accurate. And it was strange to hear it read back to me, actually, even though I did recognize it was close to my own summary. But even just putting it in third person, it was weird to hear that as me, how I'm being introduced, because probably going to ring a lot of alarm bells for listeners. It's quite surprising, actually, how rarely I do get accused of being a shill or controlled op. I think because I'm so marginal, probably. But you would think with a background like that, who can trust this guy?
You have a friendly audience here, so no worries. And we have a lot of friends on your side of the pond there, and especially a lot from Britain. I know you aren't in Britain right now, but just a lot of good friends over there. And we're always kind of tickled because in America, we believe we won the Revolutionary War, and I don't believe Britain ever conceded. And why else would they have been able to invade us in 1812 and burn the Capitol to the ground? And why do we have a financial system that is under the complete control of the city of London? And I could go on. And of course, they created the state of Israel, which also greatly controls our presidency at the moment and other past presidencies. So we'll have a fun discussion here. What we'd really like, if you'd like, is just maybe share a little bit of a background. Maybe fill in a little bit of personal depth beyond what we already read in the intro, just to where you came from and how it shaped you and how you land in present time, and then we can take it to anywhere we want after that. And thank you again for being with us.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, the only really missing element I felt in that summation was where I'm at currently with my focus at the Children of Job Substack is on scripture, Christology, a term I just learned, the so-called JQ, the Jewish question, but mainly centering around this question of who was Jesus Christ. And I'm not a self-identifying Christian, but this is something that I've been puzzled by and compelled to look into since my very early 20s. And that itself is a question mark, because I was raised, it's not really mentioned in that summation, but it might be inferred, I was raised by atheists. And well, my grandfather was Fabian Quaker, which whatever the heck that is. I think he was a Fabian before he was a Quaker, I'm not sure actually, but Quakers are, officially they're Christians, but I mean, I never knew he was a Fabian either, but you can see why I wouldn't have known he was a Fabian, because they keep their cards close to the chest. But I certainly never knew he was a Christian. I was convinced I grew up in an atheist family, and my father was expressly atheistic. I mean, he was very staunchly atheistic, anti-religious, as was my brother Sebastian Horsley, who was a bit of a celebrity before he died. So this is an interesting question to me still, really, is how come I was so so early on and so deeply and instinctively drawn to this question of Christ and what's behind Christianity, or what's inside the nut of Christianity, or the psychological operation of Christianity, if you want to be paranoid about it. I mention it here in the perhaps larger, if there is a larger question, context of just truth-seeking. I mean, that's really, even though most of my life has been, or my interest has been in very specific topics, such as conspiracy theory would be an obvious one, occultism, UFOs. I mean, there's a number of usual suspects that I'm sure that you cover on this show, one way or another. It was always in the context really of trying to get to the bottom of a mystery, which is, well, who am I and how did I get here and where am I going? Those are the three, they're kind of a cliche. And so yeah, truth seeking really. And I guess one element I mentioned that also wasn't in the summation is to do with whatever, like there seems to be a consistency between this background that you summed up there, like being born into and coming out of this social engineering family, and my giving up my inheritance and becoming a truth seeker. I won't put the quotes on it, even though it can sound a bit corny, but basically that is what I've been in my whole life, is a seeker of the truth. And that is trauma, which is a bit of a buzzword now. I feel like it's been co-opted, and we could talk about that maybe, but trauma's just become so trendy now, right? So I think it has been co-opted, but I also think it's a reality. And so yeah, I think I was configured or imprinted, well, I know I was, with a kind of a local domestic trauma and a cultural trauma, or MK culture, if you want to use that phrase, and that insofar as it kind of backfired, well, I hope that this is the case. I could still be running according to my program, I suppose, but it seems like it backfired. That actually inadvertently configured me to be so relentless in questing for the truth, because I was trying to resolve, I am trying to resolve something in myself. And seeking the truth, trying to make sense of the world. Sense making is another, maybe a less pretentious or a less cliche term than truth seeking. But anyway, sense making, truth seeking, yeah, was very much driven by disorganized malevolence imprint that I received. I'm just trying to identify it and therefore push it out or clear it out of my system.
I believe we could make a good case at present that most people, especially in Western cultures, are traumatized by design, which is, part of the whole control grid that was, maybe beta tested within certain lineages initially, but now it's pretty widespread. So I don't think trauma is is far-fetched at all. And my life vocation in medicine, a lot of the so-called diseases that people came to me for were all at their base trauma induced on one level or another. So yeah, I completely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's I agree, it's universal, it's everywhere. I mean, we can even go to something like the Book of Genesis or the Garden of Eden, the fall, like what happened there. Trauma, I think, I don't know about etymologically, but I know it does relate to a split. It leads to a split, a schism. I forgot what my point was there, really, but yeah, that does seem to be at the base of everything.
Yeah, we've had a few guests on that were MK Ultra survivors, like Kathy O'Brien in particular has become a good friend of ours. And, they describe in detail how trauma does induce fractures in personality that become very useful to the handlers that can use those multiple personalities for a variety of reasons, we'll say. So, yeah, it's absolutely creates schizophrenia. And I think we can observe that in the general population at the moment.
Well, schismogenesis is a term I got from Gregory Bates, and I think that the MK Ultra frame, and actually I've written about this recently, it's one of my approaches for understanding this culture that we're in terms of alternate culture, is the second matrix. If you think of the first matrix being the mainstream narratives around things, well, the second matrix are the alternate but also mainstream, more and more mainstream narratives, but there's still a kind of matriculation, if you will. They're still turning it into a cognitive trap or a cognitive dead end. So one of the things that I've tirelessly tried to point out, and why all of my books really, some more than others, are about myself as much as they are about the world and the culture that I'm mapping, is that the MK Ultra paradigm or frame paints it very large and in sometimes rather gaudy colours, even if it's true. The nature of it, like satanic ritual abuse, for example, the nature of the data is rather gaudy, and it can deflect from the fact that I think we're all, whether or not we're going to say we've all been MK Ultra'd, which I think is reasonable shorthand, but we're all split. We're all multiple, I think. I think we've all got alters. I think it's just that in more extreme cases, it makes it look like that's what it looks like, but actually that's what a more extreme case looks like. But what less extreme cases looks like is everybody else, right? And it's a very difficult, needless to say, thing to observe and to acknowledge the fact that we are. I mean, in the Christian frame, it's the legion. It's this legion that speaks out and through one of the characters that Jesus approaches, because they recognize him, because this person is possessed by all these entities, which, well, we could get into that today perhaps as well, like there are alternate frames for the same phenomena, and demonic possession is an older frame than, dissociative identity disorder and so on. But whichever frame we use, I think, the point I'm making is we're all split in this way. And, well, I think to me that's one of the problems I've been addressing throughout my writing, really, career. It's not really a career, but anyway, my journey, but more so in the last 10 years and even more so in the last couple of years, is this problem of that we compartmentalize the truth. The schismogenesis as well. I mean, first and second matrix is schismogenesis. You were talking before we started, you were saying you're having a rant about Donald Trump. Well, that's a very observable case of schismogenesis, and the way that and that involves conspiracy culture. I mean, a lot of Trump supporters are what I call second matrix dwellers. QAnon is a classic case of a second matrix narrative. It takes elements of the truth, but it turns them into a narrative that is essentially close to being false, because it simplifies and it excludes and all the rest of it. But anyway, the end result is you get this schismogenesis, where you get these two sides where they're opposed, and there's a tendency to want to gravitate or to get pushed into a camp just because you're definitely not in this camp. Right? So you're in the US. You see it all the time, yeah.
Do you think that polarity that you see there, with sort of that we're constantly pushing the the dual nature of the dialectic, right? Sort of create that tension and that conflict. Is that a representation of the reality here, that is sort of what we see with the fall, that we have fallen into duality, that thus that we have this dual and beyond dual personality matrix that is related to Genesis and that story? And I know you've talked about Big Mother, right? That's a big topic for you, and how just the act of being born in the way that this reality works creates that trauma. And forgive me if I'm encapsulating that incorrectly, but I do find that everything we've brought about right now all sort of connects, right? From the story of the fall, from the Christian mythos to currently how the entire superstructure seems to create this diversion, this polarity. Is this just the nature of reality, or is this something that has been sort of archonically, if you will, manufactured?
Yeah, well, it's I suppose I could say it's both, because it was the only reality that we know. It's the reality that we're born into generationally, that we inherited from our ancestors, although of course Christ was supposed to fix that, and maybe he did, and we haven't caught up. But anyway, as far as we're still carrying the error of Adam, we've been schismogenified, or whatever it is, schismogenerated. So yeah, it is the reality we know, and yeah, it's true. It goes back to the fable, the parable, or the myth of the Garden of Eden, which is knowledge of good and evil. Which is, I was questioning that recently. I was thinking, why is knowledge of good and evil a problem? I thought we're supposed to be discerning between good and evil. I mean, within a religious framework. But I think it's what you're talking about here, or asking about, because. And you brought up a number of parallels, because I was talking about the first and second matrix, and one of the ways I try to describe that is it's good cop, bad cop. We have the bad cop who's trying to control us, and then we have the good cop who comes along and says, "I've got the solution. Just sign here," right? And so that's how we perceive good and evil, essentially. Like it's. But when we become aware of evil, we get pushed towards this supposed good. But if we're in a polarity, we're still caught in a polarity. So we're not actually experiencing existence at the true good, the level of absolute goodness, which is the level that we've fallen from, where there is no evil, there is no polarity. And the third thing that you brought up there was Big Mother, which is interesting to bring in, because without getting into the Big Mother thesis, because that's huge and complex even for me, and I wrote the damn thing, but mother-father things, like most of us probably in our generations, recent generations, are from broken homes. I mean, I know I'm the child of divorce, and even if we're not, well, etc., right? So there isn't harmony in the home. There's even a cultural program of indoctrination, which is, as I'm sure you guys talk about a lot on this show, which is trying to split up the family unit and so on and so forth. So, but yeah,
or even, Jason, the notion of the nuclear family coming out of the 50s, right?
Yeah, which I guess is an atomic explosion if you split that. So, which I think is true, although the nuclear family itself was an imposition in its way, but things just get worse, I suppose. But yeah, so a child who is torn between mother and father, loyalty to mother and father, that is a more everyday kind of psychological operation, as compared to the prisoner who's trying to find his way out and he's listening to the good cop because he's afraid of the bad cop. That situation, double bind, it's talked about, and then all the way back to the root as Adam and Eve, finding out prematurely about good and evil, and somehow getting stuck in evil, weirdly. I mean, you find out about good and evil. Well, now you've got free will. It's a bummer. It's a bitch. It's hard to live with free will, as we all know. But the point is, you can choose good, but can you? It's as if the choice of good within that frame never works somehow, because you're always choosing good to avoid evil. I'm getting very deep very quickly here, but I'm just free associating. So I'll throw the ball back to you anyway, or somebody.
Yeah, it's like elections, where you hold your nose and make a choice between the least of the two evils, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was such a head twister for me in 2016, which is, I never pay attention to elections, but if people get, too hyped up, I can't avoid it, because I'd have to avoid people. And I just couldn't understand. Well, I could understand, but I couldn't resist reacting to that. Why are you choosing evil? Don't you get it? Just because it's lesser, it's still evil. It's just, just don't. Well, it's back to good cop, bad cop. There's no reason to believe the good cop. That's just foolish. It's a setup.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say I did a 3-part series on my Substack, Jason, for this election, why we shouldn't vote and how there's alternatives. And the amount of backlash I got from people that were, and this is harking back to what Bear and I were talking before we went live with this sort of Trump phenomenon, which is this, cult of personality where people put blinders on emotionally and become children when it comes to the election season. And it is a bit of like an MK Ultra event going on. So I think, that's another really important part of sort of waking up and growing up is getting out of and this goes back to Big Mother again. I know I keep bringing it up, but it's like getting away from this need to have mommy and daddy take care of us. And one thing Bear has mentioned in the past, which I think you might find interesting, is that there is a sort of a very deep esoteric notion that we aren't supposed to go through trauma when we are birthed into the physical plane. That is a phenomenon that might have to do with that allegory in Genesis, but that is not how it's supposed to work. We aren't supposed to go through pain and the mother going through the trauma of birth. So there's something there too that I think needs more investigation. That's not actually how it's supposed to work, right, Barry? You've mentioned that in the past.
Yeah, and back in my early career and with my own family, we just chose different ways. We had our kids at home in our bedroom, and the kids weren't yanked out with forceps or subjected to drugs or getting their their genitals mutilated, and at least it's a start in the right direction. From what Mike is talking about. So. My experience in the medical profession, it is absolutely trauma-based, beginning with our indoctrination as doctors. You couldn't think of a better MK Ultra program than to what medical students go through. And then, of course, most of us come out the other end, not just brainwashed, but very zealous about anybody who doesn't agree with us.
Well, I think there is a tendency, if you've been traumatized, if you've been messed up by the system, that messes you up by definition, and so you can't think clearly and make right decisions, but also you don't want anyone else to dodge the bullet that you had to take, because it makes you feel even worse. So the thing is what's called, negative reinforcement, or the psychology of previous investment. If you sort of secretly suspect that the procedures that you were subjected to harmed you, but you really don't want to believe that, one way to convince yourself or stay convinced that they're good is you inflict them on others, which is, talk about a recipe for disaster there. Generationally, this is occurring, I think, all kinds of, I don't want to repeat myself, but we're invested in a system, and I suppose this applies then to the voting thing, which is a bit, it is a bit strange, because I don't know how long you guys have been at this in terms of investigating, the hidden layers of social reality, but it used to be, only 10 years ago, any self-respecting, card-carrying paranoid would laugh at the idea of voting. And the idea that there was a bipartisan system in the US, it was just, that was 101. It's all controlled and etc. at that level. But somehow it's like goldfish bowl syndrome or something. Somehow it was like also with Russiagate, people started to believe that the CIA were our friends. How did that happen? 2020, Big Pharma is your friend. How does this happen? Like there's a cognitive regression. Never mind that. It's not, people aren't evolving cognitively, but they're even regressing. So I'm not sure if my point here was what I'm going to say, but this is also symptomatic of trauma, because dissociation. That's the most essential element about trauma to me, to keep it as a very simple formula, where we already mentioned fragmentation, but fragmentation is dissociation. which is dissociation from the body, which is dissociation from physical reality. And of course, if you dissociate from physical reality, you're not going to notice or be aware what is harming us physically. And so this is how it snowballs, I think.
Yeah, I from the boomer generation, and I'm in my 70s, and the folks that I grew up with and went to college with in the 60s, the very things we were railing against, war and big government and trying to return to the land and live more natural lifestyles. Now, a good portion of my generation is actually defending those things, on the other side. So it's a strange phenomena, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I'm very skeptical, let's say, about everything, just about everything. I mean, I might have some blind spots. I'm sure I do have blind spots, but specifically, I'm just skeptical about human beings' ability to face reality. And this is what, again, back to the second matrix thing, I'm not entirely convinced, or I'm very unconvinced, that conspiracy consciousness in 2025 is people facing reality. I think it's another manufactured frame that people are being corralled into. And so I try very hard to counteract that, to neutralize that with my own writing and podcasts, and when I do interviews. I did the Higher Side chats recently, for example, which you probably know about, and I did two actually, invited me back, and I spent half the time essentially challenging him what he was doing, because I was very uncomfortable about being on his show, because I felt that he talked to a bunch of shills and a bunch of delusional, dissociated conspiratainment artists, and I wasn't there to cast aspersions on those individuals, but just to challenge the host. Like, if I'm going to be talking to you, I'm coming into a context that I don't belong. I got a lot of negative feedback, and people didn't like it, which I suppose you could say, well, that was success, really. I mean, if they'd liked it, I guess I'd have to wonder why. But it's uncomfortable. I mean, it's uncomfortable to be in this position. But currently, and probably for the foreseeable future, i.e. the rest of my life, I'm quite self-isolated because I live in Galicia. And so the only people I interact with are on the internet. And of course, one of the good things about the internet is one can be very selective, right? But one of the bad things is one can end up in an echo chamber. And I think this is kind of what we're talking about now. People are maybe not by nature herd animals. I don't think they are. I think by nature, I think we're whatever the opposite is there, kind of solitary, but not, there's a communal thing, but kind of self-orienting or self-determining, I think human beings are, unlike certainly herd animals, but animals in general, they have to follow instincts. There's something about the human being that needs freedom, that needs to find freedom and thrives on freedom. But we've been configured traumatically, trauma genetically, to be these herd animals. So it's a very powerful impulse, is to find your collective and to take refuge in it. And so this is the echo chamber is the equivalent of that. You find where you think you belong, and I think that's being used against us, essentially. I mean, it's one of the ways the internet is being used to herd us into different audience cults, and then those audience cults can then be obviously algorithmically influenced, and they can be categorized, and they can be infiltrated, however else it works. I mean, I don't have the minutiae of the understanding at hand, but as a general model, it's something that I'm aware of, and I think I am instinctively, the way that I operate seems to instinctively neutralize that, because I never seem to generate large audiences. And I lament it, because I want a large audience, but I also see it in this context, which, well, maybe it's necessary, because the larger an audience, the more of a herd it becomes.
I think the first schism that we have experienced in more recent times is separation from the natural order. And now when you're placed in an urban environment and, obviously surrounded by larger groups of people, then you end up doing exactly what you're talking about, choosing the herd. And like in politics today, it's not discernment. It's like choosing A or B. And within that choice, there's no room to deviate from an entire platform. So, on our show here, since we live, more in a wilderness situation, we too seek solitude. But then, myself, the only time I really interact with people is like right now on the internet, and it just so happens that there's thousands of people. But we do have the luxury of just turning the internet off and, going back out in the woods or down to the river and take our cues from a larger palette, we'll say, that allows you those freedoms that groups of people don't normally allow. So I think that was why they divorced us from nature in the first place.
Yeah, I think there's a formula for freedom and solitude, which has to do with this, which you have to be willing to go against the herd, and you have to be willing to separate from the herd, and that in a subtler way, because I'm not saying you have to be Jeremiah Johnson, because, well, I don't know who can do that in today's environment, even logistically, never mind having the skills, but in a more, in a subtler way, what I think it has to do with is becoming or learning to become indifferent to what other people think of one, which is incredibly, it's profound actually, just how influenced we are by other people's opinions. I think it's kind of unrecognized, almost like the fish in the water syndrome. Like we're just so conditioned to think that we have to care what people think. In fact, I think we conflate caring about others with caring what others think of us, and they're not the same at all. But yeah, I think it's a lost orientation or a lost capacity, is to go one's own way in this existential sense. Yeah, so I mean, just to use a concrete example, it's why even though I'm absolutely drawn to the figure of Jesus Christ, Jesus, whoever he was, I'm not in any hurry to become a Christian, to join a group there, because somehow that's contradictory. Somehow what I love about Christ was that he went his own way. I know a bunch of people followed him, obviously, and now 2,000 years later, well, you could say it took over the planet, although things have changed in the last century. But yeah, central to that example, obviously being willing to get crucified if you upset people, that's consistent with what I'm saying here, but also being willing to go your own way, I suppose, when he went into the desert, right, for 40 days. That's kind of that. Symbolizes that, to rediscover our internal guidance, which I do think is our nature. I do think it's our nature, and being in nature definitely deepens that sense. Do you have animals?
We don't raise animals on my farm here. We specialize in medicinal herbs. So the only animal I have is the one you just saw in my lap a bit ago, which was my Australian Shepherd. And we have chickens, but not herds. We're not that kind of farm.
Right.
So we've had a number of guests that have different takes on the historical or non-historical Jesus, however, whatever your belief system is. So maybe we could segue into that. Was there a historical Jesus? Was he the Son of God? Was he an advanced consciousness trying to set an example that perhaps as ye shall do greater works also? So what's your conclusions, if anything?
Well, definitely not ready to talk about conclusions, and I doubt I ever will be, really, unless I die to Christ and Christ lives in me. then I might have something more conclusive to say. Have you talked to anyone who is into Rudolf Steiner around this? What Steiner's view was?
Yeah, absolutely. I've
We spoke to the
studied.
voice of Rudolf Steiner from the Rudolf
Yeah,
Steiner channel.
yeah.
Dale Brumvold, you mean?
Yes.
I was
Right.
trained
We
in,
did a show
and
with him this year.
I was just going to say I was trained in anthroposophical medicine, and I go back about 35 years of doing a deep dive into Rudolf Steiner. So, uh, I believe I did learn a lot of good things, but practical things that I could apply to my trade. So, I don't take any one source as the only source, but I believe there was a great debt of gratitude I have for what he did bring to the table and what I did take away from his teachings. So, yeah,
Yeah.
we're very well versed.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's good that you have taken that from Steiner, because I haven't. We've tried to begin a little bit of whatever it was called, his approach to agriculture and whatnot. Because we have a vineyard, but we haven't. We barely got to step one with applying the Steiner method. But anyway, I'm saying it's good just because one of the good things about Steiner is you can test some of his stuff and you can apply it. You can see if it works. Now, this isn't the case with his stuff about Christ, or at least it's not so easily the case. In fact, I can't even understand his take on Christ. I don't know if Dale Brunvoll. I was thinking of inviting him on my Jobcast specifically to ask about Jesus, but I'm guessing that he won't know what the hell Steiner meant about Christ Jesus. I could be wrong, but I guess I'll ask him by email. But nonetheless, insofar as I'm getting to the bottom of Steiner's take, it does seem closer to what fits with my, I don't want to say felt sense, but I like it. I like it anyway, what I say. I mean,
Didn't Steiner say that the man of Jesus was a man, and that he'd embodied the Christ, the sort of Christ consciousness for 3 years, and so it sort of came into him, and it's sort of this impulse, if you will, that he chose to embody for the evolution of into the next epoch. And then, of course, there's the very important miracle, or the aspect of the blood of the hill of Golgotha during the crucifixion. That is a very, very important part of Steiner, and that the Christ blood going into the earth then resonated across the plane and allowed for sort of that new epoch to unfold. I mean, that's sort of where I get, and I agree. There's a lot of Steiner because he's literalist in some respects, right, around the Jesus historicity, and then it's also very out there in terms of stuff around Christ and Ahriman and Lucifer and all that.
Yeah, and I can't claim to have my spiritual senses open to that degree, or to hardly any degree, I feel, compared to something like Steiner. I don't feel I can refer to super sensible reality in that way. So, yeah, when he goes really into the esoteric, then I often get lost. There are certain things like Ahriman and Lucifer and Christ as the balance that I feel is a very simple formula, and I've been able to apply that, I feel like, for years. But with the Christ Jesus thing, actually one of the hardest things to understand for me is the historicity of it, like, because he's got two Jesuses born roughly the same time with the same named parents, Mary and Joseph, and he's got these different layers, astral and etheric, and the individuality, and they're kind of shuffling around like a deck of cards, but eventually we end up with the second Jesus, who's Jesus of Nazareth, and the one written about in the Gospel of Luke. But the essence to me is why I'm saying that it fits with where I'm currently at on this exploration, because I'm reading an awful lot of scholarly books about the historical Jesus, which, by the way, I don't think there's any question about that. There was a physical man who was born. I don't think any serious scholar questions that. Maybe Richard Dawkins still does, bless his soul. But I haven't read any credible argument for there not actually being a history to it. Now, of course, history can be faked and so on and so forth. So if you go deep into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory, you can question absolutely everything. But anyway, in terms of looking at the different scholarly works, even non-Christian scholars acknowledge that there's a history there. There's just only a few fragments to refer to, but so the essence that I'm responding to is Steiner is to do with adoptionism, this idea that was around in the early days of Christianity, but got labelled a heresy and got sloughed off, into the pit of lake of fire or what have you, and basically, don't go there, don't think about that. And to me, it's so far it's helping reconcile this tension, because this idea that Jesus was 100% human and 100% God, well, I thought that was an interesting thought experiment, because clearly it doesn't make sense, because he has to be 200% then. But I felt it had some meaning. But I couldn't get behind things like the virgin birth. I never have really. I just thought, what's that about? Why is that part of the story? And I don't think, a lot of Christian scholars say that they don't think that's accurate either. So I don't think you have to believe everything to be aligned with the Christian faith at all. I think hardly any of it is necessary, to be frank. But that Christ was really a historical figure, yes, you have to accept that. And yes, something that is truly divine lived through him. Yeah, you got to go there too. So Steiner's view, was that at the baptism by John the Baptist, the description of a dove descending and the God saying, "This is my beloved Son, in him I am well pleased," which according to the book I just read, there are different versions of this. One of which goes back to the Old Testament, which also includes, "On this day I have begotten him." And so what Steiner was saying not through reading the scriptures so much as through his tapping into the supersensible realms, and this, unfortunately, he uses the term Akashic records, which I think is very tainted now, but anyway, it probably wasn't back in his day. That's a reference to the Christ, the being who is Christ, who Steiner believed was the consciousness of the Son, or the essence of the Son, which I used to be a bit of a sun worshipper. Now it's considered Luciferian, but anyway, descended and entered into this relatively perfected body of Jesus of Nazareth through a 30-year process that went on previously to prepare the body, or rather, not 30 years, but actually hundreds of years, because in Steiner's view it went all the way back to Adam, but also to Abraham. So there were two Jesuses, so two lineages. So one is the original actually image of God, Adam, and then the other is Abraham. And Steiner believed that there were 42 generations where the discipline of those patriarchs was constantly refining and purifying or avoiding sin, to the extent that by the time of the Jesus of Nazareth's body was in good shape, let's say, genealogically, and all of this combined, the God, the extension of God, which was also living in the Son, and whatever that means, entered into. And so that was the incarnation, and that was the moment that Jesus of Nazareth became the Son of God, and then onward, to the 3 years later, to the crucifixion, the resurrection, whatever happened there. So now I'm actually going to talk about this, perhaps, or maybe not now, I've talked about it here, but I'm going to refer to it at the next meeting that I'm having on Saturday, which is with a focus on Christ and who he was, within this context of adoptionism, because it's early to say, but I think to me it does reconcile some tension that I think is worth reconciling, as opposed to positive tension that can lead to something fruitful. To me, I feel there's a tension around, there's just some inherent contradiction in what Christians are believing, which is an understatement. I think there's dozens of things that Christians believe that are inherently internally contradictory, and I think it impairs cognition if you believe things that are contradictory, unless you're aware of it. then I think it can be effective. But if you're just papering over the cracks and saying there's no inconsistencies in the gospel, right? Well, then you're gaslighting yourself, and there's an awful lot of auto gaslighting going on. And Christianity is not only not an exception, I think it's exemplary in the realm of auto gaslighting. And I don't like being gaslit. Right?
Got that right. Well, we've done a show not too long ago with Joe Atwill about basically the Roman creation of Jesus, and he puts forth a pretty good theory around that. And the only thing I would say is that you could still look at the creation of the Christian church as a Roman construction, but that doesn't necessarily have to demean the idea of the historicity of Jesus. But these are all really interesting rabbit holes to go down. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Joe Atwill's work, but we did a show on that, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was on his show back when he was with Jan Irving. I think they had a falling out or something. And so I have talked to Joe, and I know about his theory. I have to be honest that even though this might sound closed-minded, I don't know. I mean, part of my approach is I just don't believe it, and I know you have to listen to the evidence, but with this question, and maybe with a lot of others, I'm avoiding second matrix attempts to understand Christ. I'm staying in the first matrix. I'm interested in the scholars who have dedicated their lives to looking at scripture and history, and I know you can't trust any source, but yeah, I mean, that's my approach currently anyway.
Jason, for our audience, could you define second matrix a little more? For me, it seems like it's sort of a derivative, right? That's manufactured in conspiracy culture, but would you mind sort of, just for those who aren't familiar with that terminology, explain that a bit more?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try, obviously, because you've asked and because I keep referring to it. But it is a difficult concept, because I've been talking about it for almost 20 years, actually, and I still find that the way that I define it, the way I understand it, changes, and that people don't quite understand it. And so I think a proviso or a preamble is that conspiracy culture and conspiratainment isn't synonymous with second matrix. It's just an example of it. So another example, and I have experiences of this, is if you join a spiritual cult, and of course nobody thinks they're joining a cult when they do, but if you join a spiritual group and you feel that you found the truth and you found a new way of living and a new way of thinking about things, you tend to end up, and this is what makes it a cult essentially, not in reality interacting directly to the truth, but in a second matrix. You found this alternative frame for understanding existence, and it hits the spots in all the ways that it questions and challenges and refutes and provides alternatives to the bullshit that you've been gaslit and psyoped with until you found this alternative. And so to that effect, it's like the good cop, bad cop again. And to that effect, it's useful, it's effective. It's like the nail that's driving out a nail, but then the second nail gets stuck in the same hole, and basically, so you've defeated the purpose. So a simple way of, encompassing how I apply this is that we've been conditioned to suspend our disbelief. We're in this Hollywood superculture where we are lured into the first matrix, and we've forgotten to disbelieve. We've been traumatized, so we don't disbelieve things that we need to disbelieve, and we don't question. And so the second matrix provides the means by which, or the data or the narratives by which we start to question the narrative that we've been entrained to believe. But the purpose, if it's used effectively, it just causes us to suspend our disbelief. No, I'm getting confused with the term now. Suspend our disbelief. Yes, to unsuspend our disbelief. So we no longer believe. But I mean, as an example would be the moon landing, right? If somebody says, "What do you think about the moon landing?" I say, "Well, I don't believe it really happened." Now they're going to assume from there, oh, so do you think Stanley Kubrick did it, or blah blah blah? So that's an example actually of second matrix. Is not so much that the moon landing might have been fake, but that Stanley Kubrick did it and la-di-da. You got this whole polished narrative, which if you look, or Tavistock Beatles that we talked about, or that we messaged about that. To me, that's second matrix, because yeah, you definitely need to question the Beatles, and clearly they were useful social engineering. But Tavistock created the Beatles is a second matrix narrative that there's very little evidential basis for, because I looked for it. There are a few arguments, but they're not even that solid. So it's going prematurely from unsuspending disbelief, so you no longer believe, to believing something that's an alternative. So I don't believe exactly that the moon landing was faked or this. I just don't believe in the moon landing, right? I just don't believe in it. But that leaves me in a place where I don't actually know.
And you don't believe in the official narrative.
I mean, if you have to pin me down, I do believe the footage was fake, because it just looks so bloody fake. I mean, and looking at it now, you think they didn't even try very hard. And I've joked, well, clearly Stanley Kubrick wasn't behind it, because he'd have done a much better job than they did. So I definitely don't believe in the footage, and I could say why I think what's going on there and blah blah blah. You know, it's not like I don't come up with narratives, but of course I don't know that they didn't go to the moon. How can I know that? I just don't know. So.
That's true with a lot of things. You know, we can investigate and come to conclusions based on facts of what isn't true, but you know, if you're saying something isn't true, I've done this my whole life in medicine. You know, I know a lot of things aren't true. That doesn't mean I know the truth, but I don't need to know the ultimate truth in order to know what's not true. So I think, you know, it's, and there's a great effort to either put you in one camp or the other. Well, if you say that's fake, then you're saying, you know, it's true. Well, no, not necessarily. And I know in your work, you've described yourself as not a big fan of Kubrick, but maybe, sorry, I interrupted, but go ahead with what you're saying. And then maybe if you could expand a little bit on, who Kubrick was in the first place, and you know, because I know you've written quite a bit about him.
Well, I think I had more or less finished what I was saying. I mean, maybe Mike can say, was that sufficient to answer your question?
Yeah, yes, indeed. I think we get it, and it's like a paradox that in the search for truth, and you know, disbelieving all the nonsense out there, we can easily fall into the trap of believing in something else out of this need to sort of, I think it probably goes back to trauma, right? Again, and this need to be safe and secure, these fundamental elements of what it means to be alive as a walking man or woman here. These are just part of our experience here, and it's about awareness. It's about being able, I think, to step outside of the conditioning that is inherent to us all, and to just be compassionate with ourselves, right? And to give ourselves a little bit of a break, and just to be okay with saying, "Hey, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know."
I think that's the key for me. I used a title recently, The Opportunity of Uncertainty. There's actually a lot of freedom in uncertainty, but we've been conditioned to think that freedom and power and what we want comes through knowledge, which is back to the Garden of Good and Eden, good and evil perhaps. But it really doesn't. And part of the conditioning necessarily, I mean, there are things like bears talking about, I mean, if you know what herbs can heal you, that's important, useful knowledge. But there's an awful lot of stuff that we think, A, that we need to know, and B, that we can know, which we don't. And we get lured and tricked into this. I mean, I wrote about the shape of the earth in this context recently. Like, I'm not a flat earther, but I could say I don't believe the Earth is round. It's not exactly accurate. I kind of do lean towards it's probably round, but I'm not invested, is the thing. I'm not strongly invested in what shape the Earth is, because it doesn't affect my life in any way, shape or form, and finding out wouldn't change it equally. And B, there's no way for me to find out unless I believe my astral projection experiences in my 20s, which it was round, by the way. But I don't, right? I mean, I don't know if they were real or not. So yeah, that's a big part of the psyop, I think, is that we've fallen for the lie that we can access certain kinds of knowledge and that this knowledge will make us free. I mean, this is I've said about what Jesus said. He didn't say information will make you free. He said the truth will make you free. And the truth is very specifically the truth that is pertinent to us. We do not say that it's subjective, but the truth I said earlier, who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? You know, am I created in the image of God? If so, I want to know that in some deep sense. I'm not going to find that truth in a book. I'm going to find that truth actually in my own heart. That's the truth I think that Christ was talking about. But yeah, the age of the internet, well, it's the information age, right? I don't know what age we're in now, but post-information age now. But information inundation, it's like the person who's most certain will win the argument.
Well,
I think we're in the trans age now.
I think it's also as simple as if you take a controversial stance on any particular subject, it gets a lot of clicks on YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
right.
one of the big things about the truther sort of, freedom, like you were mentioning, and this is no knock on Greg and Higher Side Chats. He's a good friend, to us, and Bear was recently on his show, but because we live in a commercial world and we've done shows on how commerce runs everything, it also can tend to drive, the content and, and where people are going with this stuff. And unfortunately, it's a weird, like we struggle with this too. It's like, yes, this is entertainment. Like Bear and I often say, hey, we're here to put out good radio, if you will. But also we also have a responsibility, because the aim of this isn't what you're saying, is to seek truth, to properly vet our guests and to do our best to put forth information that we feel we resonate with and intuitively know is true, at least on the path towards truth, right? At least in a way that is not here just to get clicks and bump numbers, but to actually do good and to try to embrace beauty and love and all those good elements of what it means to be seeking, to be a seeker, to be a true philosopher. It's a slippery slope,
Yeah, well, I think earlier we were talking about something, I know it was about voting and how people have, well, Bear was talking about, I mean, in the 60s, people were more wised up than now, and those same people have become unwised up. And you were saying, somebody was saying how you get annoyed, your listeners get annoyed when you're questioning voting. It seems so ironic to me. I mean, it seems funny, but
we did a vote on it.
So where I go with this is, I try and make a stronger point so that it's basically unassailable, not because I want to win the argument, but because I want to get through, I want to communicate, which is that social reform is not compatible with truth seeking. Like if you're trying to, what Bear's doing there with learning about plants and things, of course that can have a knock-down, ripple-down effect in your community. So I'm not saying a man is an island or anything. We do want to develop skills and awareness that can help our fellow man. I'm not ruling that out at all. It's central to being an individual, as being part of a community. Those two things are compatible. But the whole voting circus is part of a long, centuries-long psychological operation that gets us to invest our attention and energies in problems that we cannot solve, in points of view and in relationships that we actually can't sustain. Parasocial, I call it. I mean, it's called parasocial relations. So we've got this idea of a collective humanity, for example, and we actually think we know the number, 8 billion. Well, we don't know what humanity is. We don't know those 8 billion people exist. We're never going to meet them. We're never going to, but we're supposed to care about them. Well, that's a constriction or an imposition on the human psyche to try and extend itself out in this way and to assume responsibility for the planet. We're told that a good citizen now is a planetary system. This is another part. I see Bear's nodding. Maybe you've talked about this before, because that's the UN agenda or UNESCO or WEF or Club of Rome, the usual suspects. They're telling us, they're conditioning us to believe, that we're guilty and that we're irresponsible and that we're supposed to be taking responsibility for the planet and giving up everything, etc., etc. I'm sure listeners are familiar with this whole agenda, but I was bringing it, as I say, back to me as the real crunch is, and I think this is an example of Christ as well. My kingdom is not of this world. Our orientation can't be to the world or to society. We're in it, but we're not of it. And yes, we have to move through it in a way that doesn't do no harm and all that. And being a responsible human being does come from, it is a kind of ripple effect of following our own intuitive sense of what the truth is, or truth seeking. We've talked about it, but it can't be the primary agenda. So, the whole voting thing, I think, is just the tip of an iceberg, essentially, that somehow we feel that we're supposed to be socially responsible citizens, and that's more important than this thing that is more difficult to talk about because it's been, I guess it's been put in this false frame, but we think it's more important than serving God, essentially. I mean, that's what I say. It's hard to use that phrase now, A, because people are so cynical and socially conditioned that their values are elsewhere, but B, because it's also been co-opted by charlatans and hucksters and scoundrels who use that language to lure us into second matrix deceptions. But essentially serving God, however you take that, however literally or metaphorically, you could say serving the truth, it has to be priority number one. Sorry, I just gave a little bit of a sermon there, but I was just trying to make a point.
Well, there's another sinister side to that as well. When we register to vote, we're signing a contract and entering into agreements that if people read the fine print, they may not like what they're agreeing to. So there's many sides to that. And then just the arrogance of thinking that, we somehow know what another soul needs to experience somewhere, other parts of the world, or even in our own country when we cast a vote. So
Yeah.
I think we need to just become a little bit more practical about things. We're talking about Steiner, and the things I have learned from Steiner that I can wrap my head around are like in anthroposophical medicine, there's things you apply and you can actually observe the results, when you're working on a body. Or when you're farming, he demonstrated in Europe that when people adapted his techniques, it worked and they grew good food and food scarcity came to an end. And I believe even maybe what Jesus was teaching was a lot more practical than what we understand. I know that the heart, if you, for instance, look at that, it is the central sun of our anatomy, and it does have an energy field. And when people tap into whatever you think of as source, which is an electronic body right over your head that also can be measured, then the energy field of the heart expands. And when you adapt certain practices like that, then we notice that the body gets healthier. People have less toxic emotions and attachments. And I think adoptionism was another decoy put out, by the church and saying, well, God has to select you. We're not suggesting that there's not a higher intelligence, but maybe it's a personal choice to redirect your attention in a certain way where that energy can come in and create that expansion with your own being, and not necessarily something outside of ourselves that is making the choice for us. So I could be
Interesting.
wrong, but it seems like Jesus was just saying a lot of real grounded things.
It's interesting because I just made that point with a Catholic on my podcast. I mean, it was similar, and he said, "Oh, that sounds too much like Gnosticism to you." But I was saying, isn't it just about where our awareness is, essentially? Like, we are saved. That's what Christ said, you are saved. So if we are saved, why are we not living like that? Why are we not experiencing it? Well, because our attention isn't on the God within us. It isn't on the Christ that lives in us. So we just need to move our attention. And yeah, he didn't like that. I was surprised because I thought I was just giving more praise to Christ, really. I was saying he's everywhere, which is in the Gospel of Thomas, right? Split the wood and I am there. So yeah, I mean, I think I agree, although I do think it's sort of both. I mean, there does say, I mean, I've said this, I put it this way, like, I do think we have to get down on our knees at some point to God. But we have to get up again. I think Christians, they know how to get down, but they don't know how to get up again. And then, atheists and anti-Christians, they just won't get on their knees, but they're not really standing up. They're just flat on their backs or something. But so there's this balance. I think there's a balance between the two perspectives. But I also agree about the heart. And I think one of my questions when I asked for feedback after my meetings was, how was the heart to head ratio? Because so much of interaction, dialogues, conversations, discussions are head centered because we're using language. And I think, a lot gets lost because I do think the intelligence of the human being, just as the life of the solar system, is in the heart, the sun, this solar center. And interestingly enough, I spoke to this chap, Ari Torresson, who's an anthroposophist, who's a vet, but he's a natural energetic healer. And I won't go into his spiel, but he mentioned that he took the jab, if I can use that word on YouTube, during the you-know-what, just to find out.
We just like to term it as the kill shot.
Okay, well, that, just to find out what its effects were, which I thought was a bit rash, I have to say. And he said it went straight for the heart. It was attacking the heart and trying to close the heart down. Have you heard that?
Yeah, and we elaborated on that quite a bit. Again, being in the business, what we're able to understand is that it really closes the bandwidth of perception starting with your neurology, and makes it very difficult for through the normal larger bandwidth by way of the pineal, they get really dampened. And a great comment that we heard from a lot of people is they just couldn't feel God anymore. So I think it's a real phenomenon because so many people experience that. And I agree with you, from my own experience, the ego definitely needs to have a good humbling every now and then. So it's not about arrogantly saying that, anything other than that, but I think it is just where your attention is at.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, I was very skeptical about the COVID and whether it exists and all that, but I did catch something in 2023 which it had this, I mean, physically it was uncomfortable, but I've had a lot of physical afflictions because I had chronic fatigue syndrome, whatever that is, for 20 years. But the most unusual thing about whatever it was that I did feel I lost my sense of God or spirit or me. I just felt hollowed out. I felt so empty and just like sort of coagulated despair. And I'm familiar with despair as well, but this was beyond. It was almost like I felt like a machine or something. So I don't know if you've heard that as well, not just about the kill shot, but
we could talk a lot about what we're all subjected to. Right now, for instance, we're experiencing short micro vertical oriented waveforms that are a product of Wi-Fi and cellular and all the things. No matter where we live, we're all getting it. And those are military grade weapons. You can, research that and find that they have been used in military theater. And those carrier waves can be modified at any time to control behavior, control physiology. During the whole pandemic, no doubt people were getting sick. We were just identifying things that we know can make people sick and produce those symptoms. Maybe there's other things we don't know about, but we could show that, we were all being subjected to things that make us sick, including things that are sprayed in the sky and elsewhere. So, and obviously within the kill shot, there's a lot of things downloaded in there too that we could discuss. But yeah, people were feeling sick, and we all had our different versions of it. But yeah, you just have to understand there's many sources for that. Like, for instance, when Italy went down, and really became widespread with symptoms, they just happened to unleash, a pre-prepared grid to canvas, great parts of the country with the new level of 5G, I think it was at that point or whatever. So, yeah.
Well, I think there certainly seems to be an agenda to disconnect us from the truth and reality. That's even a famous, I think it's William Casey, one of the CIA directors' famous quote, once we've divorced the we've got the US population, everything it believes is false, then our work is done, right? So but that has these deeper spiritual, energetic connotations as well, to be disconnected from the truth, reality. Eventually, like the end game is, can human beings be disconnected from the spirit? And I don't believe that they can, not all of us, but I think, it's maybe to some degree it's a numbers game, and I think an awful lot of people can, and by these methods that you're talking about here, which are legion. I'm curious if you've ever heard that stone houses, which we live in here, because that's the houses that there are in Galicia, can somewhat block these effects, because we can't get signals hardly at all inside, and I'm very happy about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a natural insulation, less synthetics. The houses that most of us live in have, are wired with dirty electricity coming in the first place, and actually can conduct all the things that we don't want.
Right.
Yeah, and they're framed and hollow and barely have any material, where you're looking at a much denser mass, right?
Yeah. You're in much better shape there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for anyone listening, if things get really bad again, I mean, to me, they never stop getting worse, but people feel that we've gone back to the old normal, I think. Very naive. But anyway, if the heat picks up again and you're looking for a place to escape to, I do recommend Galicia, because they've got all these abandoned stone houses, even villages, that are selling for a dime and a bit of renovation, and
Yeah, that's great. We've, in fact, our buddy Topher has been in the chat here today, and he's a phenomenal builder of domes and different sort of structures made out of different kinds of concrete and materials that are made to be not only more resilient around these, we joked about earlier today, these quote unquote natural disasters now, but also this idea of resonating within sort of the true spiritual framework that nature is in, right? Versus, like, as Bear was saying, these vertical waveforms is sort of synthetic stuff that is not truly resonant with nature. So this more harmonic building is also, I think, just as important as in terms of going on the offense, if you will, than just defense, right? Building structures that are actually coherent and working within nature's true resonant capacity. So that's something you probably get with stone, but also within the shape of the structure, within sort of how it's manufactured and everything. And that's great that people are getting back into that, because when you look back at like cathedrals and things with domes and all these different structures, you know, from quote unquote Tartaria, which you might call a second matrix, Jason. I'm not totally sure on that, but yeah, obviously they were hip to all this stuff and understood the energetics of our architecture was really important.
Yeah, I don't know Tartaria, so don't worry, I'm not going to burst that bubble or try to. Don't know what it is. I mean, anyway, the second matrix, the thing is that it's like disinformation. It's usually 98% true. It's the spin, it's the narrative that gets created around. I mean, there are a lot of actual, you know, lies in there for sure. But it's subtler. To me, my understanding of second matrix is much subtler. It's not just disinformation by any means. That's just one layer of it. It's, well, like I say, it's the spin and the intent behind it, perhaps, or the energy of it and the effects of it.
You could almost call it like an overlay, right? That is more beyond just data and information. There's maybe even something resonating in a, you know, more energetic way.
Yeah, well, the medium is the message. I mean, not to cite somebody who himself was probably a first and second matrix agent, although I do have a soft spot for Marshall McLuhan, but obviously I don't trust him. But anyway, the medium is the message is a very important formula, I think, in this context. I don't know, I think the way that he applied it or the way that it was influential was probably not beneficial. In advertising, for example, became, you know, deified and things like that. But this notion that the quality of the information that we're receiving is determined not only by the information itself, but by the channels through whom it's coming is absolutely essential. There are people who speak total true facts, but they've got an agenda.
Mm-hmm. Hey, this could be a good segue, because I did want to touch on this because we talked about it on the opening here. The Teachings of Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda.
I was just about to go there, Mike.
Okay, well, I just figured that's a great segue, right? Because I'm interested in sort of what your perspective is on the Toltec tradition and everything around sorcery and the validity, the ontological actual truth behind that versus sort of the man behind the message.
Yeah. Funny that you brought it up, because I don't talk about it at all, but I have been thinking about it a little bit lately, and I'm not sure exactly why, but in the context of Christology and my current thing. So I have been aware of for decades, and I used to be very dismissive of Christians who were former occultists and who got freaked out by their experience of the occult. And they swung to born again Christian, and they said it's all the work of the devil. Well, I used to scorn those people, as I say. I used to think they were lily-livered cowards and so on, even though I was not, and I was never averse to Christ. I never had an anti-Christ point of view, but I was a shamanic guy. You know, I was into sorcery and shamanism, and somehow I thought they were compatible. Now I don't really think they're compatible. Sorry, did you want to jump in? Oh, no, okay. Thought you looked like you wanted to jump in, Mike. Yeah, so I don't think they're compatible because of the intent. See, my sense about, and this is true of Gnosticism, sorcery is a quest for power. It's accumulating knowledge to accumulate power, and supposedly that's going to lead to freedom, which would be salvation, I presume. If it's total freedom, that must be salvation. So although I don't necessarily think, oh, it's all satanic, I think it's basically doomed to failure. And ironically, this is in the Castaneda books themselves. Like there's an acknowledgement in one of the later books that the Toltec sorcerers realized, the males, it didn't bother the women, that all their efforts were actually doomed to fail. There was no way that they could use impeccability and knowledge to get free of the ego in Castaneda's thing. But they didn't give up. Weirdly, because they got so used to living impeccable lives that they just gave up the goal, the impetus or the incentive or the motivation to live impeccably in order to achieve something. They just continued because it felt like the best way to live, and then they did attain freedom. So that's an interesting thing, because that does include this idea is that you develop the will to this incredible capacity, but at a certain point you relinquish the will and you surrender. Now Castaneda didn't put it in the terms of surrendering to God or anything like that, because of course he wasn't creating that model. But it's interesting that it's in there. And there are a lot of things in Castaneda, I haven't read them for years, that are profound. Another one is that sorcery is a dead end. I mean, profound in this larger context, let's say, in this sort of skeptical of sorcery context, that Don Juan tells Castaneda, according to his version, of course, whether he's real or not, that sorcery is a dead end, and that the only point of it, second matrix, is as a nail to drive out the nail of ordinary awareness. You can't believe anything that you believed once you start entering the world of sorcery. But if you believe the world of sorcery, you get stuck there as well, and that's even worse. So that's in there too. So there's an awful lot of things in Castaneda that make it much more profound than, even the people who admire it realize, I think, if there are any of those left, but certainly people like Jan Irving or whoever who are just dismissing it now as a psyop, they're not looking at the nuances and the subtleties. I still consider those books to be literary works of art and masterpieces, I guess. I mean, I'm not a believer in masterpieces and that whole sort of cult of art, but anyway, they're clearly incredible works. And I still, I guess I tend to think that probably a lot of it's true, even though I think Castaneda, I don't think he made stuff up exactly, but I think and funnily enough, I'm questioning this around the Gospels. To what extent did the Gospel writers simplify, choose to emphasize, to turn a more spiritual thing into a literal thing in order to communicate? Essentially, it's a communication device that's conveying the idea of Christ and the teachings of Christ in a way that has to be effective. They may have played with the truth in a way that was genuinely and sincerely well-intentioned and maybe even right? They were deep guys. I don't think about Castaneda, obviously I don't put him on that level, but I do leave some room for the fact that maybe what he was doing there was also, he felt, was necessary as a way to convey this body of knowledge in a way that people could receive it. So I think one idea is that a lot of it was dreaming, that he learned to dream, enter into the second attention while asleep, would wake up with these blocks of intensity, as he called it, all of this experience of dream, flattened it out into a narrative. He didn't want to just say, I had this dream, so he made it like, because I had those dreams in my 20s and 30s. They seemed to go on for hours and hours and days, and I could wake up remembering dialogue, and they seemed utterly real, and they were about Don Juan, some of them. So I was convinced I had tapped into that lineage in my 20s. And now I don't know, I might have done, but I did do a lot of psychedelics before, during and after, and I renounced totally 100% my psychedelic use, and I discourage anyone to mess with psychedelics. I think they're extremely harmful, I'll just say that. Ironically, that's in Castaneda too, the untold harm to the body that power plants do, quote. That's an actual quote of of Castaneda, but apparently Don Juan. Castaneda was too stupid, he needed shaking up. Okay, fair enough, maybe once or twice. I'd say they could be helpful if we really need to get shaken out of the first matrix, but they do untold harm to the body, I'm convinced of that. So anyway, summing up, I would say the net harm of Castaneda is much greater than the net good, but one could argue that about the Bible if one wanted to. I mean, crikey, the Inquisition alone. But I wouldn't. But I would with Castaneda. But it doesn't. There's still the baby in the bathwater. And the other thing in the sum up is Castaneda. I think there is some real evidence that he had ties to intelligence. I mean, it's not smoking gun or anything, but he himself talked about it. Why would he have talked about it if it was not true? He talked about being an assassin. So I do think Castaneda was promoted and used. I don't think that insofar as there were real sorcerers he was involved with, I don't think they were MK Ultra CIA agents. But I think, as in something like alien abduction, there could be two things running parallel. So that you've got the MK Ultra is using and fabricating alien abductions, and fragmenting psyches and allowing entities to materialize. I mean, that's a very complex subject to just refer to, in passing, but it's a mixed bag, right? What's going on there for something like Whitley Strieber, a whole book about it. And so with Castaneda, similarly, I think there's probably three things going on. One is real sorcerers that he connected to in some way. Two is the CIA handlers and all that stuff. And three is Castaneda caught in the middle, confused, fragmented, traumatized, on a bid for worldly power. He did create a cult and go insane in the end. That's a red flag number one, the biggest one. So yeah, with those three things, I have just decided, well, better to stay away from them like psychedelics. But I mean, they changed my life in my 20s, and although they did take me down some dead ends, I did get to the end and I turned around. So I don't feel it was necessarily lost time. I have explored, the labyrinths of sorcery, and I found that power is not enough, knowledge is not enough. There's something else that I'm seeking. So I think that's valuable, actually. You have to find out what the wrong way is before you find the right way.
Castaneda was an important stepping stone for a lot of us. I dived in with both feet myself way back. But there comes a point, I believe, I get nervous whenever I have to have a middleman, whether it's a shaman, a drug, a priest, a guru of some type. And I just think, we're entering hopefully a new level of development, which brings me back to the teachings of Jesus, because I don't see where he's trying to convince us that we have to go through him, but just setting an example of what we can all do. And, there's a great movement now with ayahuasca and a lot of things. And, I get it, but like yourself, and what I've learned in my business is when you take those things, you're opening up some doorways and leaving yourself vulnerable to all sorts of energies that may not be a good idea. So I think ultimately we're on our own, and that's perhaps the best place to be.
Yeah, well, one thing I didn't throw in the mix there is that I think with Castaneda, insofar as there was truth in that, and I wrote the same about Willie Strieber in a separate piece. I wrote about both of them in a single piece. Is that if you have direct contact with forces of that kind that are embodied, even, really, that makes it really direct. It's going to derange you, because it's just, insofar as that's real.
Agreed.
And so I think that Castaneda was chosen and Strieber was chosen, insofar as whatever was real going on, as scribes to pass this stuff on for good or ill, maybe both. I'm much more skeptical of Strieber than Castaneda, actually. I'm almost 100% skeptical of Strieber at this point. But that didn't make them really, that was almost like they were sacrificed to it. They became sacrifices to the knowledge. They were destroyed by it. And then they become a cautionary tale. Like, to me, if you're going to read Castaneda, I don't know if anyone is these days, definitely end with Amy Wallace's Sorcerer's Apprentice. That's like the capstone. That's like, okay, this is where all this leads. So unless you're going to go the whole way, the Toltec way, recapitulate every thought and it's basically impossible anyway, so no one's going to follow that path. So then you don't want to go Castaneda's way, which is just turn it into a narrative and you make a personal identity around it and go insane. So I guess what you're saying, Bear, and what I'm saying, it can be a launching point for something, but it doesn't take you where you think you're going, right? And in fact, you find out you're glad you wouldn't have wanted to go that way.
Mm-hmm. So with our remaining time, are there any things you'd like to share that we haven't gone over, or maybe about projects you're involved with right now that you haven't quite got out there yet?
Well, I always say, or not always, but I often like to refer to why I'm doing this, at a conscious level. Obviously, unconsciously, I can't speak to that. I try to fathom that and include it and make it conscious. I do think the internet is a limited hangout and a limited option. I think we sacrifice our life force every time we turn on our computers and we agree to interact through what is increasingly aromanically or AI controlled media. And so I think it's more and more important to know why we're doing what we're doing. And as I mentioned, or I haven't really mentioned, but I mentioned the vineyards. We've got goats here. I have a lot of things to do out there in nature or where we live, and I feel that that's very soul enriching and nourishing. So I want my time on the internet to be sufficiently meaningful to justify not being out there with the goats and the chickens, and right. And so the way that I understand my focus is about individual connection, personal connection, soul connections. We can use this temporary media to connect, not just intellectually and through communication, through conversation, but at a soul level, like to discover a connection that is there independently of the technology. I do think we're all connected, even though that's a cliche, but I think there are certain connections we're seeking that will help us to find our place in existence. And I could refer to the body of Christ there, but I don't want to seem like I'm propagandizing myself, but I think that is a metaphor for what I'm trying to talk about here. So yeah, I always want to bring it down to direct connections that are direct and personal as possible. And so really, although I earn a living doing my Substack, writing about the gospel and scripture and second matrix and all the rest of it, and my weekly podcast is an opportunity to meet people and talk to them, that's all well and good, but the next phase is these online meetings that I host. There's a men's meeting every week, Tuesday at about this time actually, and then currently I'm doing twice a month, I'm doing a Christology group, really. I mean, we're just trying to work out what's going on there, as we've talked about today. And a few people show up, and it's always fruitful and interesting. And so I'm always encouraging people to pass through the fourth wall, to move from a parasocial relationship to a really a social relationship, and what's beyond that is a soul relationship. That's what we're all craving and yearning for, is soul connections. I believe that. I mean, if we have a soul, which is a question we haven't got into today, and it's too late for that. But as far as we have a soul,
that could be part 2.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, that's it, really. Well, no, and then if I'm optimistic at this age, because I've only got a few decades left, God willing, eventually for that to lead to meetings and interactions, gatherings, assemblies, that's the original meaning of church, away from the technology here in Galicia. I mean, if I ever get anyone here, I've had a couple of people show up, but it's very, very hard, as you can no doubt imagine, to get people off their computers into the real world. And of course, most of them are a continent away. Even if they're in England, they're not that close, because, well, you've got to get on a plane and things like that. But yeah, ideally, if that can happen, like a physical world connections and gatherings, I think would be my ultimate goal. But if that can't happen, my eyes are always on eternity, if you like, if that's not too highfalutin, because we're not going to be here for very long, and then we're going to die into whatever we've created whatever legacy or whatever it is. I don't know how that works, but where our intention is really set. And I think, as Steiner said, we die into the connections that we've made, the soul connections we made. Dante talked about that as well, heaven being the connecting souls. It's made of souls who are connected, which would be the body of Christ. So that's basically it. I mean, that's my last pitch, if you will, is, pitch in. People can send me an email if they want to connect directly. That's Jason with a U at protonmail.com. I want to meet the people who want to meet me, generally speaking, because I say I'm a small fish in a huge pond, and being the internet, and so very rarely do I find I get either creepy fans or annoying fawning fans or trolls or something. Mostly if people want to meet me, I find I want to meet them. So I'm always shouting out to that, like I'm a fisher of men.
Wonderful. So is there a website that you would direct people to that have all those links, and we'll put those in our show notes as well so people can find you?
Yeah, Children of Job at Substack. I mean, that's why my home has become Substack. It's just the way things have gone. But yeah, they'll find everything they need there as far as I'm concerned. I think just don't use AI. Don't ask AI who I am, because it doesn't know.
Well, this has been a delightful conversation. And again, thank you so much for taking time. We know it's getting late your time there.
Yeah, it's getting dark a little bit, but yeah, it's good. It was good, good length chat, and I've enjoyed it immensely.
That's great to hear, Jason. We enjoyed it as well. We had a really riveting chat going on the live stream, which is fantastic. If you guys want to join us next week, remember we go live at 10 a.m. Pacific time every Thursday. Jason, this has been fantastic. You can go, and I've really grown to like Substack more and more. I took a little bit of a break from it last month, but I really do appreciate that platform. childrenofjob.substack.com. That link is actually already in the show notes there. So go support Jason, subscribe to him. He actually has you take paid subscribers as well. So you do specific, different Substack posts and stuff, right, for your paid subscribers?
50-50. I make half of it free and half of it, roughly that.
Fantastic. So that's a great way to support Jason's work. And we very much appreciate you, brother. I do think we would be completely open to having you on for a part 2. We can dive into a lot more topics. We didn't even get into the JQ today.
Yeah, well, that's a minefield, as you know. It's a minefield, but yeah, I'd be up for talking about that. I think it's another schismogenetic program, and the truth is in the middle. The truth is in the middle. I'll just say very briefly, for all the things we can lay on the J's, it's to do with all the good that they had, all the good potential, and how it's gone wrong over the centuries. So it's both. I see it as both a very positive influence and also a very negative influence.
Great. Well, we look forward to that chat. And hey, guys, thanks for joining us today. Remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it back in spades. We appreciate you. We love you. We'll see you next time. Peace.